Jane, thanks. Thank you for the opportunity to present my paper here today. Since we have been with traveling academics already in countries of the Global South, we will now dig even deeper into that topic and have a look at the question how university industry linkages can matter, or how do they matter, how they can matter in these countries. When I was preparing the presentation, I started to be not completely happy with the title that I chose, because I think a lot of things that I will say in the next 30 minutes are not necessarily only about university industry linkages, but also of the impact that universities can have on wider development issues on society. So maybe cross-sector research and teaching collaboration would be a better word to really cover what I'm talking about. And since this is the symposium about universities, my focus will be on the university perspective. So I will in particular look at what universities can do, or how they should be equipped with capabilities to form these kind of collaborations, which of course does not mean that it's the sole responsibility of universities to do that, and if there are none of these linkages, it's the fault of the university. It can also be, of course, a failure of policy or of the industrial sector who might not be open or interested in these linkages. I think this research has maybe relevance for different disciplines. Of course, I came to that topic from an economic geography perspective, from an innovation economics perspective, which is maybe obvious here, the innovation economics approach when it comes to the impact of universities on technological upgrading in emerging economies. The economic geography approach maybe has two views here. One is to look at context-specific models of organizing, for example, things like the triple helix configurations that Henry talked about yesterday. And I think we already yesterday started a bit of these discussions. How can these configurations work in other contexts? So I think this context-specific reasoning is maybe something that appeals to economic geographers. And also, of course, the idea, how can universities react to local needs? How do they form local networks? But of course, it's also relevant for development studies, this wider role in society, and for higher education studies and management, I guess, because it is also about how to transform universities in that respect. And the presentation will draw mainly on three kinds of research projects or researches that I carried out in the last years. So the conceptual parts maybe refer more in general on a framework that we proposed, and we called it academic capabilities that universities can develop. So we borrowed from the idea of technological capabilities, which refer to firms, and tried to apply this idea to academic capability building on the other side here. And then I was able to do a lot of work on these issues in Asia in a consortium funded by the IDRC, which focused not only on Asia, but also on African and Latin American countries. But I was part of the Asian team, which did comparative work in China, in Malaysia, in India, Korea, and Thailand in Asia. So this is the approach where we can compare a bit experiences from different countries. And my in-depth knowledge here is on Thailand. And there I carried out most of my own in-depth field research also. So these are maybe the three approaches. And so you will see that the talk is somehow, of course, focused on the Asian experience. And I know that also experts from other continents are here, so it would be, I guess, great to share these experiences later. At first, the question is, what kind of concepts do we need to understand university-industry linkages or other kinds of cross-sector collaborations in the Global South? This will be the conceptual part. And then I will go through 5, maybe more hypotheses or issues also for discussion later, which from the research that I did popped up to be somehow critical issues to arrive at meaningful interactions of universities in the Global South. This is the development or the developing of the academic core, demand-oriented teaching, research that has relevance for development, the wider role of universities in society, and then also a co-evolutionary perspective that is maybe partly close to the triple helix idea. And the discussion then might be what kind of URL for what kind of development later on. So university-industry linkages, just to give you an overview what I mean with this, are basically very different activities and mechanisms that link the university sector, and here it's a productive sector, but as I said, this can also be, of course, extended to the society here. And these activities then are not, of course, not restricted to research collaborations. There are also services and consulting activities of importance, and particularly training and education, because there is, of course, not only the large stream of graduates from this sector to this sector, but there are, of course, also a lot of possibilities to apply innovative modes of interactions, and it's mainly the focus of many universities in the Global South is teaching. They are much more, of course, teaching-oriented in many respects. And the mechanisms can reach from more informal personal contacts, and they can be sophisticated up to kinds of science parks, incubators, etc. Okay, so this is just to give you a general overview what kind of mechanisms might be there on the market. What is important maybe to conceptualize university-industry linkages in the Global South? So I think the most important thing is that these kinds of linkages are very context-specific, and this is not only true for countries in the Global South, but also if you compare the linkage mechanisms that are, for example, in place in a country like the US or a country like Germany. And therefore it's, I guess, hard somehow to judge just from looking at what kind of mechanisms are used to judge whether this is an efficient system or not an efficient system, because I think the kinds of mechanisms that are used do not say so much about it. And that might be due to the fact that the demand for knowledge input from industry and society might differ. So if you think about different industrial sectors, they might have very different needs. If you think of different knowledge bases that these industries have, some might need more informal process upgrading activities. Some sectors might need more formalized interactions where you have really new products or licensing agreements, etc. Of course, the knowledge bases of the universities then differ. I will go into that when I talk about the academic capabilities later on. And of course, the institutional arrangements might allow or might not allow certain activities. The Bayh-Dole Act is always the example that is cited, I guess, for a specific institutional arrangement that created a specific way of interactions. But of course, this looks very different in different countries. So let's be careful with generalizations here. Then, of course, when we look at the Global South, the critical question is how can these university-industry linkages contribute to development in a wider perspective, or if we look at the narrower industry perspective, how can they contribute to technological catch-up processes of sectors and firms in these countries? And there, the notion of learning is critical in the Global South, and the enabling of actors to assimilate and to improve acquired technology, so that they can really move beyond the step where they just buy equipment and then maybe in the end they are not even able to fix it, and here is then, of course, the first step, how to improve it, how to assimilate, to adapt things, and move on. So the idea of building technological and academic capabilities. And in the Global South, I think the state has a very critical role here in building innovation systems, because of a lot of these things are public goods that have to be created, and therefore the state and public investment is also important. I will come back to that later, to the trade-off of maybe becoming too much based on private sources, of becoming too entrepreneurial too early, and where the risks of that might be. So maybe how can we understand knowledge creation when we look at the firm level here? So if, or in a very initial stage, you might have multinational corporations that invest in a location like Thailand, for example, and they might then have along the value chain a lot of contacts, of course, also with local suppliers, and there might be also, if it works, a transfer of knowledge. But local universities might not have a big role in this initial phase, so they might merely provide graduates, and this might be the main function, and not much interaction going on. And of course, as we know from innovation systems research, that interaction is critical here. So the idea is to come to something like this, where we have close knowledge transfers between the actors, where we have local universities that are also embedded within global systems, within global knowledge networks, and then universities who can even provide more relevant skills when it comes to graduates, and who also can enter the knowledge interaction and maybe become an indigenous source of knowledge in this kind of innovation system. That's maybe the aim here. And what we argued is that we might understand the ability of universities to fulfill such a role by looking at something that we call academic capabilities, so functional skills and organizational ability of universities, of a country's higher education institutions, to carry out such an extended role in society. And we identified 7 capabilities, of course, teaching and research, the traditional ones, outreach activities, and which we found particularly important, synergies between these 3 functions, so that we do not see these 3 functions of the university in isolation, but that we really see how, for example, knowledge transfer can have impact on better research or better teaching, and vice versa, so that we really have the integration here. And this is maybe dependent on certain organizational capabilities, on the budgeting system of the university, but also on the management system, and also on institutions, on regulations for carrying out these kind of activities. So these are these sets of capabilities, and then we tried somehow to rank them here, to say, okay, we might have very low if there are low capabilities, then this might not be a complementary, or universities might not be a complementary knowledge source. Intermediate capabilities might enable them to really be a complement to other sources in the innovation system, and then when we reach advanced ones, we really have more independent sources. So you see 3 levels and 7 activities. I won't go to all the 21 fields that this would produce now in the table. Yeah, you can just get an idea that we have these 7 activities and these things here. Maybe just to hint at the most important ones, of course, the aim should somehow be maybe here to get to research-oriented teaching, demand-oriented curricula in this training field, and also, of course, to somehow get here input from outside the university to research grants. These are the traditional functions. Maybe when you look at outreach activities, this might evolve from just ad hoc linkages, some consulting activities, and then more advanced modes might be that there's really a strategy to form these linkages. But as I said, the networking, I guess, is critical, and you often see this kind of fragmentation where no cross-fertilization is taking place. And maybe at an intermediate stage, you reach at a linear process, so you have some capabilities in research and teaching, and you just exploit them. You sell some of them on the market. But I think the best case would be that there's really a synergy, so that you really have this kind of interaction, then that outreach activities also have an impact on the other functions here. Okay. When it comes to the organizational dimension of universities, this might move from very bureaucratic systems where university don't have a lot of autonomy, very itemized budgets, and they might not have the ability to really formulate some strategies to strive forward, to differentiate each other, and also to react to the needs of local actors, because maybe the budget or the bureaucracy gives them no leeway to react to their specific surroundings here. And that might evolve into more diversified funding, into the question of autonomy, which might at first be, of course, this is maybe the precondition in academic autonomy, academic freedom in a sense, but then also, of course, the possibility to have a strong leadership of university administration, and also to reach some kind of administrative autonomy here, to really establish a development periphery for these kind of outreach activities. And of course, the institutional dimension here. We saw that in many cases in all of these countries, that there are really no regulations, or that it's even prohibited to interact, and that is then, of course, the end of the story in these cases. And therefore, of course, the question is how you can integrate these kind of outreach activities, for example, also into the promotional benefits, which are often, of course, based on the research and teaching tasks, on the traditional tasks. How can you put that into promotional benefits? How can you maybe provide matching funds? So this is the framework that is somewhere behind that thinking. Where might universities move, or in which fields might universities advance in order to become more able to fulfill this wider role in society here? Okay, the critical issues for the Global South, the 5 critical issues. What do I mean with that? So this might sound somehow very basic. Okay, how universities need to have something to offer to their, I said, customers, meaning to their stakeholders is maybe the better word here. But I think in many cases you will see that this is very difficult. So the question is, what kind of skills are there? What kind of skills do the graduates have? Do I really have graduates that are equipped with the abilities to fulfill this role in industry or in solving societal problems? And this, of course, also goes back to the knowledge that the university have. And this is then to reach this kind of, or to develop this academic core in universities in the Global South is not only possible by internal efforts. It is, of course, also an important part, university management and the creation of incentives, but maybe even more important is how the universities are embedded, or how the external environment reacts to the universities. In which way are governments able to provide sufficient funding to universities, and this is of course in some of the poorest countries in the global south a very big problem, and sometimes it's of course also a problem of the consensus within society where money is spent for. If you, for example, have a large military budget or you spend money on other kind of subsidies, this is not always an easy task to have sufficient public funding, and of course also the autonomy issue. Do you trust your universities in a way that you provide them with some autonomy here? And it's of course also the question, is it possible to join global knowledge networks, for example, by scholarships, by sending people around, by inviting people, by somehow being active in the global community. And another important part to develop the academic core of universities is something that we found also in many of these countries. It is a kind of reversed knowledge transfer. So knowledge transfer that might go from industry to university, because we encountered many cases in which not only the multinational companies, but also some of the large local companies, due to the lack of funding at universities, had much better, much more state-of-the-art equipment. And in that case, there was really the possibility by, for example, donating equipment to universities to have the knowledge transfer first in this way. And from the experience of Thailand now in particular, a warning might be to go too early towards the commercialization of universities. So we saw in Thailand very early budget cuts for the university. So at a time where the number of students were still increasing, the government thought, okay, it might be a good idea to commercialize our universities, to cut budgets, and that might be an incentive that they find ways to earn money somewhere on the market. So it was more a kind of laissez-faire commercialization. So that's what I call it, poorly managed or not managed commercialization intense. And what happened was, of course, the universities became more commercial in a way, but what they did was they introduced some additional full fee programs because, of course, in a country like Thailand, you have a lot of affluent middle and upper classes who can afford these kind of programs and who just want this title for prestige. So this is then the questionable academic quality here. So this was one reaction that many universities went to. And the other one was, of course, the budget cuts affected the salaries of the professors, which were already quite low in Thailand. And then the reaction was again rather rational because the professors did some moonlighting to earn additional money from individual consulting arrangements, also of questionable academic quality. It was then, of course, more like that you have a report where the name of a professor is on, and that was the reaction. So you could see that the universities, in many cases, were not ready to really become a strong player in such triple helix arrangements here, for example. Or it was not a triple helix arrangement at all. Okay, so that this kind of developing the academic core is maybe the starting point. And then I think very important is from the experience here the question of teaching, demand-oriented teaching. And I think in many countries of the global south, not only Northern Africa, where it's very obvious, but also in Asian countries, in China, in Thailand also, you have a strong mismatch of demand for and supply of university graduates, and I think this is visible because of the situation that you have a high unemployment rates of graduates and at the same time firms who are lacking qualified workers. So somehow universities are producing more and more graduates, but these graduates seem not to be equipped with the necessary skills here. And it's maybe somehow a systemic failure here because particularly subjects in science, technology, engineering, mathematics are lacking subjects that are important. If you think, for example, about making agriculture more productive, you might need agricultural experts, agricultural engineers here that can go, for example, to agricultural extension centers later. Or you might have some export-oriented sectors that have to compete with other locations, and you might need engineers here in these fields. But still, what is happening is that you can see a large amount of students going to business management subjects and then not finding an appropriate work, which might be also because for the universities it might make sense. They have a lack of funding, and then it's of course cheaper to open another course in business administration than to really establish an engineering program here. And the other side is of course curriculum development. So this is, I guess, very important to bring practical skills into teaching, creativity enhancement to really develop curricula. And here is, I guess, a very good starting point for interactions between universities and industry and society to really use the perspective to really get into interactions, to get feedback on development, for example, of curricula. And there is a good practice example that I just want to highlight here from Thailand. So they had a university, a middle-sized, young and innovative university, which created something like what they called an engineering practice school. They modeled this after MIT programs on engineering practice schools. And they jointly developed the program not only with MIT but also with local industries. So this was this kind of making it context specific, so really formulating a program, not just copying the MIT program, but really bringing local industries, firms into it and looking what kind of skills and what kind of curricula do we need. They received funding from different sources for that. And what they are doing, and which is unique in Thailand, maybe not unique in other places, is that in the 2-year master program, students really stay a year at the company and solve a technical problem there. And it's not just sending the students there and then letting the company allow the company to do whatever they want with the students, like in a normal internship maybe. But it's really a joint planning of this student project by industry and university staff. So there's a university staff assigned to each firm as a site director, and this is then not only interesting in the short run for the student project, but what happened from there is that these kind of projects transformed into contract or joint research projects with the university, because from the ideas in the student project, larger trust was of course first built, and that was then a stepstone maybe to really formulate a larger project together with the university. So also I will talk about co-evolution, so it takes time to develop these linkages, and this seemed to be a way to do that. Okay, research for development or with relevance for development is then besides demand-oriented teaching the second step. I would also say, in terms of importance, I would rank the teaching as a more important starting point here. And here I think the idea is how to deal somehow with the fact that maybe many of the knowledge demand is not yet new to the world knowledge that is demanded, but it's more about adapting or customizing knowledge and technologies to specific local contexts, to the specific local needs. And here I think it's really a question, how ready are universities to do that? Because we see a lot of, I think in many countries, when you look at Asia in particular, to China or Thailand, or also to Korea in the past, that they of course Vietnam, they send vast amounts of students for PhD training to Europe, to the US. And what was often mentioned also when we talk to firms is that these people then they were not really prepared to the context-specific problems that appear in the local community, and of course they were also maybe not interested in that, because they were trained to aim for a publication in an international journal, and that might not be interesting for them what they could do there. And this of course refers in particular to SME development. They might need very basic technological solutions. and they might have not a lot of choices where to go when it comes to external knowledge sources. So universities might be maybe the only ones, the local universities might be the only ones where they can go to, because they can't afford an international consulting group coming into the firm and fixing some kind of process technologies or improving that. But of course, these projects might be less rewarding for the universities, as I said, in an academically, but also in a financial sense. This is, I guess, an important point of public policy action to look after this SME development function. And when it comes to foreign firms and large domestic firms, as I said, there the knowledge is sometimes, or particularly the equipment is sometimes superior in the large firms. So a lab at a university in these countries might somehow be much less equipped with state-of-the-art equipment, and therefore you might have a reverse kind of knowledge transfer. But I think there is an incentive how you can leverage this knowledge transfer from industry, or the involvement of industry, for example, by donating equipment, how you can leverage this, because the industry has, of course, the interest to have access to qualified graduates, and in that sense, they might be willing to do that. And again, from Thailand, two examples. First, for these kind of programs, first one is the SME development issue. So here we have a program that was also modeled after an overseas experience, interestingly, from a program from Canada, introduced in 2001. And here, this program really had a slow start, because this was really more a one-to-one copy by a development aid project, I guess, from Canada here, and it was not that much contextualized. So they reformed the program after a couple of years and made it more fitting with the local needs. And now, when we interviewed also the National Science and Technology Agency and also firms who used that program, it proved to be quite a useful approach to provide short-time support for these kind of solutions. So you have an office that screens or makes a diagnosis free of charge first, to identify what kind of problem does the SME have and who might be a suitable expert within Thailand, mostly within Thailand, not necessarily, but most are from Thailand, who can be identified as an expert at the university. And then the government provides 50% of the costs. So you see these are smaller project, but this is for an SME, of course, already a large project in a country in the global south. And these projects also have this evolutionary perspective in it somehow. So we found many examples where the contact with the university professor was formed via this program, and then later on trust was built in such a program, and then they went for more activities after they saw this can really help us. The other case is, how do universities collaborate, or how can they, what could be a best case maybe in some way for collaboration with multinationals. So at least in Thailand, this is by far the most meaningful involvement of multinationals in universities, and in general, the universities and the multinationals in Thailand are not that actively collaborating and within the system, within the innovation system here. So we have Seagate Company, also the largest private employer in Thailand, and they have a site in the northeast of Thailand, and they are running 2 centers with local universities who are also in the northeast of Thailand, and the most interesting one is the only joint R&D center that is operating in Thailand at the moment of firms and universities. Of course, Seagate's main interest is to get qualified employees. I mean, this is what they also openly say, and also the university says, we know they are of course doing that to get qualified graduates. And what Seagate did is, of course, they provided inputs, they provided the state-of-the-art equipment, so they provided original machines that are used today in the top fields of hard disk drive production. They provided clean room technology, which is of course also very expensive, and they are co-funding research projects jointly with the university. And they are allowing publications and these kinds of things, and they are allowing also the university to use this in other respects. And so the interaction that is taking place here is then among graduate students, of course, university staff, and engineers from Seagate who work jointly on projects at this center. So this is but still, in a country like Thailand, it's the only case where this has happened yet. Okay. Just a quick, okay, maybe then we skip that one. Okay, then we might jump to the wider role of universities in society. So this was, of course, this example on research was focused very much on how SMEs or multinationals can get into interaction, but of course, I think even more critical for the specific context is that universities can be important change agents in these countries beyond technological change when it comes to social development, to community development, also maybe to sustainability issues that they might bring up and where they might bring forward an agenda. And they might really then have an explicit development agenda, which might, for example, be related to productivity enhancement and diversification in agriculture, or you support local cooperatives here. But of course, funding is a problem here, and what we realized in many of the cases that we also researched in Asia, that the government was sometimes reluctant to give money for these activities to the universities because there might really be some kind of competition in like whom the population in a rural area is loyal to. So the government might fear, of course, that there is then a strong loyalty with the university, so they might rather do these projects as government projects by themselves without the university, through the ministry, so to signal to the population, this is what the government does directly to you and not those critical university scientists. So there were, particularly in Thailand, some problems or some of these issues in development projects that the Thai government is running and that they are explicitly not giving to universities. But if these programs happen, they have, I guess, multiple, that's maybe obvious benefits. Yeah? Of course, you provide solutions, you respond to local needs, but you expose staff and students to real-world problems, and maybe the most important one, you bring different strata of society together, because university students in many countries of the global south are, of course, from the elites, and they might not have contacts with these real-world or with the real problems of society here. Okay, this is just to show that we have strong interaction with these local contexts. These are universities in the northeast in Thailand collaborating with northeast, and in the north collaborating with the north. This is just to show, but to save time, I will just skip that and go to the last slide already. And this is on the issue that I mentioned one or two times, that this co-evolution is critical here. So the suggestion would be to open appropriate channels of interaction as early as possible, maybe with these low threshold interactions that I mentioned at early stages, because this might pay off due to trust building in the long run. And for example, in a country like Korea, we really saw that these kind of linkages were not established because you had very strong government-industry relations with the large chaebols in Korea and directly interacting with government institutes, but not with universities, and then it was really difficult to later on to go beyond an intermediate stage of technological development because these channels were not established. And maybe one should see university-industry linkages first as a means and not necessarily as an end. So university-industry linkages or other outreach activities as a tool to develop research and teaching capabilities, not to do that in order to have measurable large outcomes in terms of innovation goes up by that amount or a lot of income is generated here. Okay, and then let's stop at this point. Thank you.